A while back I did a video on the state of World of Warcraft Classics era realms, and honestly I didn't think it looked good at all. The catalyst for me making the video then was Blizzard closing the character cloning service, which had existed since the launch of these servers. This very much seemed like the final nail in the coffin for a very niche community demand, which just didn't make sense for enough players to want to check out, as the era realms themselves when they first began got off to a very controversy-ridden start, which left many players not wanting to check them out, whatever happened, purely out of principle. So the classic era realms launched shortly before Burning Crusade Classic in early summer 2021. They were a copy-paste of Classic WoW on its final content phase. Blizzard did a snapshot of the game, characters, your gear, everything that made up the WoW servers back then, and copied it over to a new place on the Battle.net launcher. Whilst the live game of Classic would continue onwards to TBC and beyond, vanilla would remain here. This also presented the player base with a choice. Where do you want your character to go? You could either do nothing and you would be moved through the dark portal into TBC, or opt into remaining on these classic era realms instead. Or there was a third option. What if you wanted to do both? You want that classic character to go back to, but you also want to play the Burning Crusade. Sounds pretty reasonable, right? Well, of course you could do this, but it's gonna cost you money, and this was the first big problem era realms faced from the get-go. Do you remember how much the price of copying your character to the era realms were? It was $35. Yes, $35 for a character copy, which was of course automated. Needless to say, after this news dropped, players were not very happy. It seemed like an excessive price tag for what it was, and many players sought to boycott the service and refused to pay anything at all rather than having to fork out this much. Shortly after, Blizzard came back instead with a new lowered price, down from $35 to $15. Still a lot for what it was, but somewhat more justifiable. After all, you do want some way to gauge how many people are actually going to be playing these servers, and a cost up front is a very effective way to do that. In May of 2022, 1 month before this cloning service was removed from the shop, Blizzard dropped the price down to $5, and you might have even not known about that. In fact, if I wasn't doing videos on Classic, I don't think I would have known about it. It felt like a very brief announcement. And now this character cloning service is gone, so why was it such a big deal? It's pretty simple really. If you did ever want to go back onto Classic era, it would give you your level 60 character to play, presumably with solid gear, straight away. Your alternative to this will be going back to your starter zone and creating a level 1 character with no gear, no gold, no heirlooms, no joyous journey or XP buffs, on a server with very few other people playing, the entire game stuck on the last content phase, a near empty auction house, and group content being pretty rare. In other words, Classic era without the ability to copy characters felt like it just wouldn't last, and that the realms would more or less die. And I know people love saying things they don't like or that are unpopular, are going to die or are dead. I mean, WoW's been dying for nearly 20 years and here we are. But these servers had a micro population. I thought they would die off, and not from a place of disliking the servers or wanting to see them fail. I just didn't see how things would pick up. Surely there would be no coming back from this. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Clash Royale. Clash Royale is a free-to-play real-time multiplayer game available on Android or iOS, pitting two players against one another in fast-paced PvP action. Collect and upgrade dozens of various cards, including units, spells and defenses, to build out the perfect strategy to win the match. Getting started is easy, but understanding each of the cards' roles within the game can set you apart from your opponent. Work your way up the reward track as you play to unlock tons of new features, more powerful units, new arenas, emotes, and of course tower upgrades to keep your base standing for longer. The aim of the match is really simple: destroy the other guy's central tower. Doing this though can be a little more difficult, as each unit, spell and defense have their own strengths and weaknesses. Planning ahead and countering what your opponent is doing is vital, or sometimes you can just rush for the win before they can pull it off themselves. What I like about Clash Royale is how fast you get into the real content. The tutorial is simple simple and takes a couple of minutes, and then you're straight into PvP against other players. No confusing systems or being stuck on a set path for 10 minutes, and just play the game straight away. Similar to many other RPGs, there is an element of counterplay, and though you may not always have the better deck as a whole, if you play well and understand the game, you can still come out on top. Winning as an underdog is always a good feeling. So whether it's time away from the PC, commuting, or just wanting to try something different, consider giving Clash Royale a go. You can download for free on Android or iOS using my link below and get started today. Many thanks to Clash Royale for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. Well, as it turns out, over the past few months, despite all that's happened, Classic Era has been growing. It's an MMORPG which has literally not seen a new piece of content in over 18 months, and the population is increasing. Now, keeping it realistic here, the population compared to Wrath is still very small. There are bigger servers, but there aren't any mega servers. There won't be a likes of Firemore on EU or Benediction NA. Group content has a lot more planning and schedule gone into it, but the leveling and dungeon side of things offer something which Wrath of the Lich King doesn't really do anymore, and that's the feeling of being new, being a small character in a big world and starting fresh, being excited about getting a small green backdrop and seeing your first pair of grey shoulders. The small incremental upgrades feeling valuable again. It doesn't feel like a fast track to endgame, but for the lack of a better phrase, a journey. In fact, maybe not being able to copy your character is actually a positive for the game. How many people log in with their near-abyss gear and think, well, I've kind of done everything this game has to offer, and to log back off again. Now, I don't expect everyone is starting at level 1 thinking, oh boy, I'm going to be at level 60 and have all my Nax gear in a few weeks' time, but it does give you more stuff to work towards. I think now is the time where it makes sense for Classic Era to grow too. Originally, these servers launched just as we were finishing Classic, and almost everybody wanted to go on to TBC, and for many, copying characters back then was just a measure for posterity. Now it's over 18 months later, and some people are just missing what goes into Classic. TBC and much more so Wrath of the Lich King have made huge shifts to so many aspects of World of Warcraft. Leveling can be pretty much a speedrun by anyone these days. You can even solo dungeons as a warrior in heirlooms. You can go from a fresh level 80 to almost caught up in gear in 2 resets, no problem. There's just so many gear options, and the need to farm gold has dropped off a cliff. Unless you're constantly running GDKPs, farming gold hard just doesn't have much of a point anymore. It's not too useful. Back in vanilla, you could always use more gold. Classic Seasonal Mastery is soon to come to a close too. This was expected though. These realms were intended to run for about 1 year. That's the nature of seasonal content. That's going to leave a lot of Classic enjoyers without a home. And it's also worth mentioning that currently there is an event happening on Era servers too by the hardcore WoW community. I've mentioned it fairly recently, but it's worth quickly going over again just so people know about it. The idea behind the event is you attempt to level a character from 1 to 60 solo without trading, and biggest of all, without dying. It's something to spice the game up and approach it in a different way, aside from the usual grind to 60 and then do raid or PvP. And with the nature of MMOs aiming to accommodate so many different playstyles, I think it has a place within the game and can work. On a tangent, I played RuneScape for a long time, and a huge part of that game for me has become playing as an Iron Man, where you are entirely self-sufficient in all aspects of gameplay. I think solo challenges can be a lot of fun when you've done the standard game for such a long time. Suddenly you need to know new ways to do things, or think about going out of your way for a certain quest upgrade. After all, Era servers have been on the final phase of Classic since forever. It kinda makes sense to create your own fun in the game. Many of the realms on Era have also been consolidated some time ago, meaning you can and will see people from other realms. Just imagine it's multiple servers which are all on the same layer at the same time. This was done a few months after the release of Era to try and help population issues at the time. Speaking of servers, where should you play? Well, there isn't as much information out there on the internet for Era realms, but as far as I know, if you fancy, go at the Hardcore Challenge. On North America it's Bloodsail Buccaneers, and Europe is Hydraxian Waterlords. Note these realms really are just for the Hardcore Challenge players. The last time I looked on either of them, there literally was not a single item on the auction house because everybody's playing solo. If you want your normal World of Warcraft with no self-imposed restrictions, on North America it's Whitemane for PvP and Mankrik for PvE, and Europe Firemore for PvP and Pyrewood Village for PvE. As long as your character is on one of these realms or on the active cluster, as I've shown on the screen here though, you should be fine. I will say the PvP realms tend to be larger for both regions in terms of player base, so as long as you don't mind the occasional rogue sending you to the graveyard and Stranglethorn Vale, you'll be fine. Or maybe you want to be that rogue, either works. All in all, it shows there's a group of players who definitely prefer the way which classic vanilla plays, be it from pacing of the game, mechanics, game knowledge, whatever else it may be. Again, it's not like I expect Blizzard to do anything huge with Era, but there's definitely people who prefer it and who always have done. What I would say is take the fact that people are returning to classic Era as a sign. Wrath changes a lot of things in the game, no doubt a few too many for some people, and we have an MMORPG here which has been sitting on literally 0 new content for 18 months, and it's growing in size. Sure, it's not huge, but it's certainly not dead either. A core part of what an MMORPG is that it should receive updates. It's a living, breathing world. They are not supposed to end. This is part of the appeal, and yet here are the classic WoW era servers making people want to start again on a fresh character or creating their own game modes within the game. I guess if you were thinking of giving it a go after hearing all this, I'll try and break down a few of the good and bad things about these realms, and you can decide for yourself whether it'll be worth it or whether any of these are deal breakers. On the benefits side, the smaller player base is actually more like it was when your server reputation mattered in OG vanilla. If somebody acts in bad faith or ninjas, they are going to get highlighted by the player base. Gold farmers will always follow where the money is, and for them, they are not going to be on classic era at the moment. Generally speaking, they'll be more welcoming than other versions of World of Warcraft. This just tends to be true of smaller communities that realize more people in the game would make it a better place. The WoW era enjoyers want the realms to grow. The fact that era realms are showing growth in of itself is a positive, since they're the only version of this game which Blizzard are currently offering. Players have created alternate ways to play the game through the hardcore challenge for something new. The auction house really isn't as bad as you'd expect it to be. With a lack of botters and a settled economy, nothing is impossibly expensive. Low-level zones at peak times tend to be fairly active with recent growth, which is great since a lot of vanilla content does benefit from a group. On the downsides then, it's $15 a month to play a server with 0 updates. This will turn a lot of people off. There is an upside to this, however, and a reason which it costs money, and that is to deter botters. If it cost absolutely nothing, then it would be more or less a free testing ground for botters software. It's a fully progressed server. This is more or less a given. Everyone's on a different stage of the game. Some people are level 1, some people are in full Abyss from Nax Ramus. On top of that, all the raids are already out too. There's been no new updates to Era content-wise since its launch, and I would not expect any either. Whilst it's growing in players, it's certainly not at the levels of the big Wrath of the Lich King servers. Battlegrounds and especially 40-man raiding content come with planning and schedule. Don't expect to log in at 3 PM and be part of a pug raid in 30 minutes time. Character clones are gone. If you didn't clone your character, it's back to Northshire Abbey, the Valley of Trials, or wherever else your character starts, with 0 XP buffs either. Then again, Era really isn't about rushing to level 60. You are already over a year behind. What's a few more weeks? Or even months. Overall impressions of Classic Era in 2023 are a lot more positive than they've been for a long time. It might be something worth looking into for you if you want something a bit more like vanilla than like Wrath, or maybe just something to do in between raids. It's taken some time, but Classic is starting to show some real signs of life. The question is here, will Blizzard do anything or act on this rise in interest? Let me know your thoughts on the video, and as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.